Welcome. You're on Switched on IT. This is the show where we talk about everything IT. Today, as usual, we have our guests, Doug Endersby from Sydney, from Oz Hosting, and Ray Sidney Smith from the United States, I think probably in Washington today. And we'll now go and have a look and see if they're there. Gentlemen, are you with us?
Yep.
G'day,
Great.
Ray. And g'day, Barry. Good
Hi
to
there,
see
Doug.
you.
G'day. Now, gentlemen, I believe that we are talking about cyberbullying today. Is that correct?
That's right, Barry.
Okay, doke. Well, we'll turn it over to you. Take it away.
G'day. Thanks, Barry. And yeah, it's an interesting topic. We've just been talking about this in the studio before we went live. And what we want to talk about today is cyberbullying and harassment and the forms that it can take. But we're not specifically not talking about the harassment that goes on, amongst school children and protecting children and anything like that. Really, our focus today is just to talk about the workplace and how bullying and harassment can occur in the workplace, the forms that it can take, and maybe some of the preventive measures that you as managers in a business and responsible business operators can take to mitigate or prevent bullying and harassment in your workplace. So that kind of gives us a little bit of the scope of what we're talking about. And Ray, I was going to ask you, in Australia we've got some laws about the responsibility that a business operator or an owner has to provide a safe workplace, and that includes employees not being subject to sexual harassment or intimidatory behaviour, those sorts of things. What's the legal context like in the United States for workers? What rights do they have to expect to be upheld for their sort of enjoyment of their workplace?
Well, here in the United States, we have a united set of states, and each state is different. So I couldn't speak for all of the United States or each of the individual states within the USA. We do really have very different laws, both that govern the internet and how people are protected, but also how people are protected physically in their physical office spaces. There are some laws that do protect people. But everyone does in the United States have an expectation of being able to go to work and safely do their job and return home. And so this ends up, like so many things in life, it ends up being something that the business owner has to take responsibility for, and the corporate leadership needs to take responsibility for, because they cannot depend upon the government to tell people, be nice, is kind of shaking their finger and telling people to be nice. In reality, cyberbullying, cyber harassment, cyber stalking is something that is the responsibility of the business owner to protect its employees. So I really do believe that, and so here in the United States, while the Supreme Court has ruled in different ways that can be interpreted with regard to cyberbullying and harassment, I think generally what I think our conversation would be best suited for is talking about some of the ways in which people are harassed and ways in which we as business owners can mitigate those problems going forward. And so I would start with kind of understanding what cyberbullying and cyber harassment is, and I'll throw out a little bit of a definition, and Doug, you can add on if you'd like to, which is that cyberbullying, harassment, or cyber stalking is really using information technology communication infrastructure as a platform itself to in some way, shape, or form assault people, whether that be verbally, threat of assault, but basically someone should feel a sense of harm, the intent of harm to them by virtue of what's being communicated. And at least here in the United States, assault as a crime is the perception of the victim. It is not the perception of the person perpetrating the crime. So if I feel like you're going to attack me, then that is assault. And so we really have to keep that in mind, that it's the perception of the individual who's being attacked that you must keep in mind as it relates to all of these things.
Understood. And I won't make any silly comments about people being feeling so threatened that they feel that they can just pull out a gun and shoot them, because we know that would never happen over there. But okay, I think that's.
Let's hope.
That's a great definition. I really appreciate it. So we've defined what cyberbullying is, and the harassment, and obviously people can feel physically threatened, and they can feel, in a sense, sort of sexually violated, or their sexuality being questioned or interpreted in ways they're not comfortable with. There are all those sorts of manifestations of it, and I guess we can look at what is happening as something that is happening either from within the organisation. So you can have a scenario where there are other staff members, subordinates, superiors, can be coming from anywhere, that are the perpetrators of these acts. And then we've got situations where it's external parties that are perpetrators of these acts. So maybe what we can start with is, let's look at inside the organisation and say, well, what are the sort of things that a business owner should be looking out for inside the organisation, and what do they do about it? So one of the things I'd ask you, Ray, is tell us about the platforms and the mechanisms people can use to be horrible to their workmates.
Yeah, so you have quite a bit of experience with probably the first kind of harassment that can happen in the cyber world, which is email, and we'll get there and talk a little bit about how people can address email. But email is definitely one of those places, because it's the most ubiquitous communication platform that business has today. So everybody communicates by email pretty much, and so email is definitely going to be the biggest area where you might see those kinds of things. But there are more subtle areas. Sometimes there are message boards, there are the comment sections of collaborative documents. So if you're using Google Docs or Microsoft Office and or Apple Pages now even has the ability to comment or have chat built into it. Chat messenger apps. So if you're using one of the messaging apps or Slack, those kinds of areas where any groupings of employees are going to be able to have public or private conversations, that's where that kind of harassment can happen. And then there's the broader context of it happening in and on social technologies. So for example, if someone has a public-facing corporate blog, and another staff member sees that person posting on the blog and then directly addresses their bullying or sometimes subversive conversations or comments as comments on the blog of the business website, there's a problem of anonymity and pseudonymity when it comes to harassment, because that person can shield their identity either fully or partly as they're harassing someone who works on staff. And as a business owner, you have to meter out some of those things. So we could talk about ways in which we can mitigate and work to make sure that people have a safe and mentally healthy working environment. What are your experiences, and what do you feel like are some of the things, Doug, that people can do as it relates to maintaining a safe environment in email? I know that Oz Hosting, covers so much email for so many people. How do you believe business owners should be, in effect, helping keep a cohesive system that isn't threatening to people?
Sure. Certainly with email, there is something that any business owner can do, which is quite simple and easy and inexpensive to implement. And that is to enable email archiving. So, if I was a business owner and well, as I am, and a staff member came to me and said, I'm being harassed either, sexually, or there's bullying, or there's anything like that, the first thing that I would want to do is I would enable an email archiving service that allows me to run keyword triggers. So I don't want to actually read every email that that particular staff member is receiving, searching for, you know, stuff that might be bad. And I might have my suspicions about who the perpetrators could possibly be, and I can't do that with their email as well. So the great thing is, you know, to set up a keyword trigger. You know, maybe that person has got a disparaging, derogatory nickname that's been assigned to them or something like that. I would then start to monitor all the mailboxes that are in consideration for this particular, you know, problem in the workplace, and I would just set up keyword triggers. And what those triggers will do is they will just tell me if the phrase that I've entered as a trigger has been triggered. It'll tell me from which mailbox and to which mailbox the keyword was triggered by. So I'll know, you know, the date stamp of the email, and then it's very simple for me just to log in, and with that information go straight to that email, read it, and go, yes, that's going to require some management and some you know, retraining or some discussions, or it's going to be okay. And that really simplifies the process, you know, for me as a manager. And you know, I think one of the other things, Ray, that I'd want to add into that is, you know, sometimes these workplace harassment matters can become quite devastating for the individual concerned, and really sort of derail their careers and you know, and their lives. It can have quite a big impact on their lives. Now, if I as a business owner haven't taken meaningful steps to do this, then potentially that person under Australia's laws can come after me as a business for not providing a, you know, a safe and secure workplace, and I can be saddled with the economic impact of compensating that person for, you know, for their lack of work, for their inability to work, maybe for being, you know, months or even years, you know, without work because they were so traumatized by a particular event. So in the grand scheme of things, enabling something like this and being able to demonstrate to you know, to anybody that, you know, in a sense might come after you and saying you were, you know, derelict in your duties, I'd say enabling something like that is a no-brainer. You know, you definitely do it, and it wouldn't cost you much money. And you know, also for a lot of businesses, their email records are vital historical information of events in their business, and they should have some sort of a robust backup platform for them anyway. So that's email. Then there's the other
side. Well, before we move on, I wanted to just say on the flip side, in the U.S., we have fairly, let's say, interesting perspectives on the privacy of email or privacy of any communications between employees. And so for any U.S. business owners, remember that you need to make sure that in your policies up front, you tell your staff that email is not a private communication platform. And again, you should seek, you know, professional legal counsel, and we're not giving legal advice here, but but from my perspective, you know, it's one of making sure that you put it up front that business email communicated is not privy, is not private communications between those people, and that you are monitoring them so that they can't come back and say that you were somehow, you know, this was some kind of honeypot where you were attempting to dupe the harasser into committing some kind of act or something like that. So, you know, there's all kinds of issues there in the U.S. And so I just think it's good practice to just upfront say, you know, which is what we do. I say to everybody the day they start, don't transact personal email on our business servers, period. You do it and it's done. You know, you just don't do it. You know, not only for you know, electronic discovery, you know, if we're sued, we want to be able to provide clean records of our email transactions to counsel and to the courts. But also, you know, I don't want your personal communications in email because it's just more risk for me as a business owner. So, you know, no personal email via the business email. And then second, email will be monitored for harassing language. And also, you know, for potential misappropriation of funds, for all kinds of things so that we can keep honest people honest. And as long as we're being upfront with them, at least here in the States, then we don't have to worry about the fact that they're going to come back to us later and say, well, I didn't know you were tracking my email, and then somehow, have recourse in the courts against the business. So I know it's a little obtuse from an Australian perspective, but for some reason we have to be concerned about those things here in the States.
Ray, good point, and I think it actually applies to us as well. That it doesn't go without saying that the business email service is the business's email service. I think that staff need to be reminded of that occasionally, and that the business has got to reserve the right to have access to all the communications inside any individual mailbox. It's company property. And I think, we'd be well advised to make sure that people are aware of that and just use their private email account for personal stuff and just keep it out of their company mailbox. And just on that note too, I think that one of the dangers for businesses also in text messaging as well, and text messaging again is another communication medium that can be used to harass people. And I think to the extent that a business owner is allowing their staff to use their personal mobile phone to send text messages either to other staff that relate to company activity or to their customers and clients, I think is a mistake. And I'd encourage any business owner to make sure that they don't lose sight of vital communications between staff, business communications between staff and between their vendors and their customers. And the simple answer to that is just to use your email service to send the text message. And talk to your mail provider, but most of us, certainly Oz Hosting, can enable an email service where somebody can just be working in Outlook. They can send a text message to a customer or another staff member from Outlook, and then it's in their sent folder as a recorded message in the email service. And if that person replies to them, it comes back into their inbox in Outlook, and they've got a record of it there. And then the company doesn't have to worry about not having the records of communications between, key entities within their business. So there's another way I think businesses can protect themselves with that.
Now, gentlemen, I think that we will take a break here, and after the break we'll come back and pick this up a little bit more. You're watching Switched on IT. We have Doug and Ray with us as usual today. We're going to take a break, and we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Is your computer driving you crazy? Is it slow or doing things you didn't expect? Well, having a computer crash or pick up a virus can be a complete nightmare for a business, so having someone local you can trust to get you up and running again is critical. The dedicated team of experts at Computer Troubleshooters Toowoomba West will put your mind at ease from the moment you walk through the door and will get your problem solved in no time with a 100% guarantee on their work. Laptops, tablets, PCs, whatever you have, Roger and the team can fix it for you. So visit them today at 236 Bridge Street, Newtown. Well, can't get in to see them? No worries, just call them on 4642 1331 and they'll come to you. Toowoomba Troubleshooters Toowoomba West on the web at www.computertroubleshooters.com.au/Toowoomba West.
Hi, this is Mick Jagger on
Classic Vinyl.
This is Debbie Harrow from Blondie.
This is Jimmy Barnes here.
Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac.
This is Reverend Willie G from ZZ Top.
The best tracks from the greatest albums of our generation.
That's right.
From your breakfast and coffee to your drive home.
We've got the classic hits that make your workday
When you got a job to do,
Go by a lot faster.
if we haven't said it lately. Thanks for listening. The home of classic rock.
Don't touch the dial.
PowerFMRadio.com.au.
Welcome back to Switched on IT. We are today looking at cyberbullying and cyber harassment in the workplace. We have our panelists with us again today, so let's go back to our panelists. Gentlemen.
Before we left for the break, Doug had brought up a really interesting thought here that I actually hadn't thought about talking about today, but I think it's really important, which is that SMS, MMS, and other kinds of messaging apps today do provide for a circumvention of the typical corporate IT structure or the typical business IT infrastructure, especially if you have a BYOD, bring your own device type policy, and it certainly needs to cover that people should not be using those mechanisms for harassing others or providing an unsafe work environment for others. And there are actually several services that do allow you to both back up and monitor those for cybersecurity purposes, but those can actually be also used for the type of monitoring that Doug was talking about. So I think that's a really great point, Doug, and I think that people really do need to pay attention to the fact that many people have, whether they be iPads, Apple iPads, or they have other mobile tablets, Android and otherwise, that they're bringing in and out of the business, as well as laptops that are on the road, and all of those messaging apps that are being utilized by people also need to in some way, shape, or form either be monitored or having very appropriate policies to let people know that they should not be using them for ill purposes. I think we should turn now to social media, which is a fairly big topic when it comes to harassment. It's nothing different, I think, than if I were to go out to a brick wall, of a restaurant out in the middle of town and spray paint a racial epithet on the wall. That's a form of harassment, right? It's something that everybody would see as being wrong. And yet, when we do that in social media, it's not the same impact because it spreads so much further and wider than that single wall. It's really only the people who pass the wall that in effect get to see it. But now today with social media, if I put out a harassing tweet at someone, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people can go ahead and see that. And so really, as a business, we all need to be cognizant of how to both deal with, again, good policies, writing up good policies so that people know what that is, but then also knowing the right mechanisms that are built into the platforms we're using so that when it does happen, we can immediately jump into action and effectively protect our staff from both within, when somebody inside the company is being harassing, but also then when people on the outside are just being jerks. But then on the other side, then going from just mild abuse from say a past or potential or current customer, or just some member of the audience, the world that doesn't like you or your business or this particular individual, like an ex-spouse or something like that, then to people who elevate it to then something that's really dangerous with death threats or other kinds of threats of harm. And so what do you feel like businesses should do, Doug, as it relates to implementing policies? What should the front end work be done by the business before they get to the point of someone making harassing statements on social media?
Sure. Looking at it firstly on the inside the business, an internal matter, certainly I think it's got to be part of employee contracts and corporate policy documents to make sure that the different forms of harassment and bullying are covered in that, and that the company just regards any of the potential communication platforms, because there's going to be a new one tomorrow. So I think it just needs to be acknowledged in the company's policy documents that what's unacceptable behaviour towards fellow staff members. And I think one of the key things in any of these policy documents is that they've got to be accessible to your customers. So I'd say any organisation should make sure that they've got a solid file sharing service, and then occasionally somebody, the owner, somebody with operational or HR responsibility, shoots out an email and says to all staff, hey everybody, just a reminder, here's the folder that's got all the company's policy documents, and make sure that they're accessible. We can't make people read them, but making them available to them and making access very, very easy, I think from a company responsibility means that you've done your bit, and that will give you some sort of level of protection. Obviously, when people are using social media tools, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or whatever, in a bullying or harassing way, then I think that's really a coaching and a counselling job that the business owners need to do with the parties that are affected by it, and ultimately that can mean separation from the company as well. But in terms of the policy settings for the company, I think it's got to be clear to everybody that the company's LinkedIn service and the company's Facebook service and Instagram service, if they've got all these social media tools that they're using in their business, and I'd suggest they should be using them, it needs to be understood that they are company assets, and their use is for the benefit of the business. And anything that detracts from that is then a disciplinary measure that has to be dealt with that staff member. And I think that's pretty much all you can do in that. In terms of, say, let's take Facebook as being a really dominant one. I guess the thing about it is that there are many ways that you can communicate, and I think it's quite simple when we're just talking about internal. But Ray, maybe I can start by asking you about what is a troll and what do they do and how does it work, and also if we look at social media, our biggest risk as a business owner with a social media asset, a company Facebook page, a company Instagram account, and so on, is not what our internal folks are going to do, because it's going to be pretty obvious who's done it and why. It's when they may potentially adopt a pseudonym and not divulge their identity, but also when customers get grumpy or people just decide to be horrible, and then they start to trash a company using various social media tools. So maybe starting with Facebook, maybe tell us a little bit about what a troll is and what a company can do if they're getting attacked on Facebook.
Yeah, so a troll, by its definition, an internet troll is someone that comments on other people's content for attention, and it could be any kinds of attention, right? It can be to flare about an issue that they feel is important to them, but maybe not to the people who are reading. It's not on topic usually, and they're trying to get an emotional rise out of the people around them. Sometimes the troll is actually not a human, but computerized, software, that chat bots and so on and so forth that are out there attempting to garner lots and lots of traffic by posting links to things and just generally making mayhem on different social media posts. So trolls are bad. Okay, they're a huge detractor to the value that is the internet and our ability on the World Wide Web to connect with one another and share content. So we have to do everything possible. One, not to be trolls, both purposefully or by accident, and the other is to be able to identify them when we recognize them, and that can be very difficult because, as I said, it's not against the law. It's not bad to be a jerk, but it's certainly not great, and it makes it difficult for us to then know the fine line that's crossed once someone goes from just basically being negative and maybe being disgruntled to being then harassing and stalking and threatening to a person. So we really have to pay attention to the gradations of that. But in general, each of the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, they LinkedIn also, and they all have buttons on all of the posts that allow you to either report abuse or mark it as something that is wrong and against the terms of service of the policy. So thankfully today, all of the major social platforms have at least a policy about harassment and stalking and bullying. And so if it's happening, it's pretty easy for the user to then go ahead and make a report of that. But as the business owner, you need to be paying attention to this as well, which comes down to monitoring your own social posts and making sure that when people engage with your content, you're capable of stepping into place. It would be really bad if you had a post that made some disparaging statement about one of your staff members that led to it becoming more and more harassing, and it was just let to sit there for days and days and days, right? Because many people will have seen that post. So you need to really be vigilant that when someone does post on your content, you are paying attention, and then use the protocols in place. The only times this becomes a problem is when the harassment itself breaches and becomes something that is a legal issue where law enforcement needs to be involved. So you need to make sure that your own internal policies for handling harassment, but then also if someone does threaten someone's life, for example, in your jurisdiction, wherever you are, what's the right thing that you need to do? You need to look up what you're supposed to do, and then jump into action. It really needs to be something that you pay attention to. And I want to note also here, this ends up being a topic where businesses generally say, well, we don't have the resources to be able to be this vigilant. I don't want to deal with this with the trolls and with harassment, so we're just not going to have social media profiles. We're just going to not be on social media. And the reality is that the moment your business is mentioned, the moment your business is basically inculcated in any type of this negative conversation, you have a brand issue, really a marketing issue that you also need to deal with. So it's not like you can't just accept yourself from the platform and somehow you're exempt from cyber harassment or cyberbullying. In reality, you have to be in it to win it. You have to be in it monitoring, and if you're not there, that does not give you some kind of exculpatory option when it comes to someone having been harassed and you having a responsibility to make sure that your brand is not being represented poorly that way. So I know that a lot of people get a little bit tenuous when it comes to this stuff, but really understand that having a Facebook page is far outweighs the positives than it does the negatives. There are these circumstances that are unfortunate, but with just a little bit of paying attention, you can really mitigate the problems that can come up.
Very good. Yeah, no, that's good advice, and so I think that gives business owners, business operators a fair bit to go on, Ray. I think where we've come from is the different forms that it takes. Your comment just now that most social media platforms have got ways of dealing with trolls and abuse, and you can disable that, and you can report it, and you can take some measures to shut it down. And you're right, it might require a little bit of resources from the business to be able to do that in the event that that happens. But not being on social media isn't the answer, because, you know, your brand is still going to be there whether you like it or not. So, you know, it's not as if you're not going to the footy match, therefore you're not in the match. Unfortunately, not attending personally doesn't mean that you're not in the game. You are in the game, you've got no choice.
That's terrific, gentlemen. Thank you very much. That's been a really interesting discussion. And I think that a lot of that material, especially that last bit that you were discussing, is really important for businesses. I know that there are a lot of businesses out there that are quite frightened of social media because they feel like they might get hacked, or they feel like they might get trashed on social media. And it's really important for them to understand that it's better for them to be there and be in control of it, rather than having it happening subversively and they've got no way of knowing who's saying what about them.
Exactly.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We're going to close this show off now. Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you, Ray. We'll see you again next week.
Terrific. Thanks, fellas. Cheers for now.
You've been watching Switched on IT. I'm Barry. We'll see you again next week for another show with Doug and Ray.